Welcome back, everybody. Now, Keorapetse Kgositsile and the Black Arts Movement is a book by Dr Uhuru Portia Phalafala about the late National Poet Laureate. It reveals the foundational influence of Kgositsile's mother and grandmother on his craft and unveils the importance of the oral traditions, the indigenous knowledge systems, and of course the cosmologies he carried with him into and after exile. Uhuru Portia Phalafala is a senior lecturer at Stellenbosch University, author of poetry collection Mine, 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 published last year, and the co-editor of Keorapetse Kgositsile, collected poems 1969 to 2018. Well, this morning she's in studio with us to share a bit more on the book Keorapetse Kgositsile and the Black Arts Movement. Dr. Phalafala, very good morning. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning, Simpiwe. I'm very happy to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure having you. This is such a riveting read. I mean, we're just speaking off camera how enchanted I was going through this book. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us through this book. Now, let's talk about the outline of this book and the inspiration and why you saw the need to publish it.
Keorapetse Kgositsile was a statesman, a revolutionary, a poet, an academic. And during his tenure as the National Poet Laureate, I began my PhD studies at UCT on his life and work. And none of his poetry was available in the libraries, not the libraries at the universities, not the national libraries. And I thought it's a travesty that he is a sitting National Poet Laureate and none of his work is available for us to access and know his movements, his writing, his creative process, his politics. So I undertook that study and 11 years later we are sitting with this wonderful book here.
And before you get to this book, and you said that his work was not properly documented and you saw the need of creating this Keorapetse Kgositsile collected poems. This is 30 years of his work in one book.
Yeah.
Do you think that his legacy is now been disseminated to levels that you would have loved or he would have loved to see?
I think that's currently underway, that more and more people and scholars are finding out about him, about his work. And it's thanks to repatriating his work from exile that more and more people can access his poetry and his life story. So I am very hopeful that there are more scholars looking into his life and work.
Indeed.
And this book will certainly go a long way into kind of opening that up.
Trust me, it certainly will. And I did mention in the intro how much of an influence his mother and grandmother had on his growing up and upbringing. Just share more on that.
So, he grew up in rural Ditakong in Mafikeng, and his grandmother, Madikeledi, would have kind of been in that moment of the turn of the century where Mafikeng was very central to the politics of this country. The Anglo-Boer War takes place at the turn of the century, and black people are not involved in the making of this new South Africa, this country that's called Union of South Africa. And there is a lot of advocacy from people like Sol Plaatje at the time to say our languages and our culture must be at the center of our politics. And Madikeledi was also right there when that was happening. So she raised Kgositsile with this thing of you have to learn your languages. She banned the English language from her home. She said, this language came on the ship. This language. It's going to have a home invasion. It's going to invade your mind. It's going to invade your spirit. Here in the home, we must speak Setswana. You must know yourself through the language of your people. You must know your community through the culture of the people, and you must know your country through the culture of the people, because we can see the danger of this colonial settler politics that are about to kind of take rise. And this was even prior to 48. So she could see that there is something of a huge social change that is happening. And she said, you must learn your languages and you must use our culture and languages to dream up the culture of resistance against apartheid. Right.
And it's quite interesting to see that he dedicated the majority of his poems and poetry to people and movements and the struggle against racism and apartheid in some instances. And quite interestingly, I've read that in 1968 he appeared on a TV show hosted and presented by the one and only Maya Angelou. That was a very critical era in Black American culture, because that same year, on the 4th of April, Martin Luther King has just been assassinated, giving rise to riots all across Detroit and different parts of the country. And that particular era in American culture, I suppose, gave birth to the Black arts movement on the African continent, and he was at the center of it. Let's talk about his influence in in Black American culture, in African culture, and of course the cultural configurations of the Black diaspora.
So precisely because of Madikeledi, his grandmother, and his mother Galekgobe instilling this love of Setswana and Setswana language and culture in him, when the senior membership of the ANC instructs him to leave the country and go into exile, he takes with him this collection of Tswana classics. Understanding that where he's going to need to have his cultural archive with him if he's going to write anything of value. He arrives in the US in '62, right in the coalface of their own struggle for civil rights, in the height of Jim Crow, and it is actually the death of Malcolm X in 1965 that really agitates and gives rise to the Black Arts movement there. And so Kgositsile finds himself organizing politically and culturally with, you name them, Malcolm X at the time, Martin Luther, Rep Brown, but he's also at the heart of this making of the cultural wing of the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, with people like Amiri Baraka and Hakima Dibuti. And I use these names because they had adopted these African names, trying to abandon these slaves' names as they understood them. And Kgositsile is right there as this figure who comes from the continent that they want to reclaim. And he's coming with this language that is English. He writes in English, but that English has certain registers and tenors of Setswana. And there's something there that attracts them to his work in the way it's got its rhythms and it's got its cadences, drawing directly from the rhythms and cadences of Setswana, but also he's got such political acumen because he had been involved in the mass liberation movement in the 50s here that had tried, the path of nonviolence and eventually adopted the armed struggle in '63. I'm talking about the ANC. So when he's in the US and they are still in the embattled zone of saying, let's try nonviolent confrontation, he says, guys, we've been through this path. I can tell you right now, it doesn't work. You cannot appeal to the oppressor who is using such heavy machinery and brutality against us. You cannot appeal to him through nonviolence. So he comes with such experience of politics and culture. That's why he's a poet of the revolution, because he approaches the anti-apartheid struggle both as armed confrontation, but also as a cultural revolution.
Now, Dr. Phalafala, talk us through why you say this book was written on a philosophy to be the solution to Black arts.
So, this book, I just have to say, is not a biography of Keorapetse Kgositsile. It does have biographical details of Keorapetse Kgositsile, but essentially it is a book of philosophy. It is a book of African philosophy. It uses Keorapetse Kgositsile's poetry as a place from which we can harness and cull and draw African philosophy, because as I've already said, his poetry has all of this Setswana and indigenous languages at large, wisdoms, but also its communal knowledge about relation with other people, about who the human is, about the question of what is the human? What is the human under oppression? What is the human who lives under oppression, and how do we relate to one another? What is knowledge that is decolonial? What is knowledge that is created outside or away from colonial knowledge, if you will? So from his poetry, you can draw all of these concepts, philosophies, vocabularies, and a critical lexicon for what it is that we are trying to do, that the Follists have asked us to do, which is decolonize education and decolonize the curricula. So how do we take those steps? We have to look into our cultural archive, which is intergenerational, which is ancestral, and we have to listen into that archive in order to produce new knowledge away from the colonial library.
All
So
right.
yes, it's a book of philosophy.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but for purposes of understanding this book, would you advise your readers to first read Keorapetse Kgositsile collected poems first to get a broader understanding of his thought processes for me to consume this book?
Yeah.
Or can I just read this book on its own and have a broader comprehension individually?
I think they're companion pieces, certainly. You can read them independently of one another, but when you read them together, it's an enriching and really
Oh, got you.
delightful experience.
Got you.
Yes.
Dr. Phalafala, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, we just spoke to the author of Keorapetse Kgositsile and the Black Arts Movement, Dr. Uhuru Portia Phalafala.